The morning sky over Chicago hung gray and heavy, threatening snow that hadn't yet fallen. Elena Rodriguez pulled her coat tighter as she pushed through the door of Moretti's bakery, the warmth inside immediately fogging her glasses. She pulled them off to wipe them clean, her fingers trembling from cold and something deeper than weather. The bakery smelled like heaven. Fresh bread, cinnamon rolls just out of the oven, espresso from the machine behind the counter. Elena's stomach clenched with hunger she'd learned to ignore over the past 6 months. That smell used to mean comfort, community, the simple pleasure of a good breakfast. Now it just reminded her of everything she couldn't afford. She stepped to the side, letting other customers pass while she gathered her courage. Through the front window, she could see her beat-up Honda across the street, exhaust pipe coughing white clouds into the February air. Inside that car, Sophia and Miguel waited, buckled into their booster seats, wearing every warm layer she owned because the heat in their apartment had been shut off 3 days ago. 5 years old. Twin faces so much like Carlos it hurt to look at them sometimes. Dark curls that tangled no matter how carefully she braided Sophia's hair. Miguel's gap-toothed smile that he gave less and less frequently now. Children who deserved pancakes and new shoes and birthday parties, getting oatmeal with water and hand-me-downs and a mother who was drowning. Elena checked her wallet one more time, though she'd counted the contents 17 times already this morning. $11.37. All the money in the world. Until her next shift at the diner in 3 days. The line at the counter moved steadily. Mrs. Moretti worked with the efficient grace of someone who'd been running this bakery for 40 years, her white apron dusted with flour, silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She smiled at each customer, asked about their families, made small talk in the mixture of English and Italian that characterized this neighborhood. Elena used to come here every Sunday with her mother, back when she was small, before her mother died, before she met Carlos, before everything went wrong in ways she still didn't fully understand. The bell above the door chimed. Elena glanced over reflexively, then froze. 3 men entered, bringing cold air and something else with them. Presence. Authority. The kind of energy that made the other customers unconsciously step aside, creating space. The man in front wore a black wool coat that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent used to be, before she stopped being able to pay it. Tall, maybe early 40s, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples. His face was all sharp angles and controlled power, a small scar along his jawline the only imperfection in otherwise striking features. 2 men followed him, positioning themselves near the door and window with the practiced awareness of security personnel. Elena recognized the type immediately. Carlos had brought men like that to their apartment sometimes, in the early days before she understood what his import business really meant. The man in the black coat joined the line behind an elderly woman buying rolls, pulling out his phone to check messages. He stood 3 people behind where Elena hovered near the wall, still trying to work up the courage to approach the counter. She should leave. Come back another time. Except there wasn't another time. The twins had eaten the last of the oatmeal this morning. The cupboards were empty except for a can of tomato paste and some stale crackers. She had no food in the house and no money to buy any until Friday. This was it. This moment. Ask now or watch her children go hungry. Elena took a breath and stepped into line behind a businessman in a suit, who stood behind a young woman texting on her phone, who stood behind the man in the black coat. Her heart hammered so hard she felt dizzy. The shame of what she was about to do pressed against her chest like a physical weight. The line moved forward. The elderly woman left with her bag of rolls. The man in the black coat stepped up to order. "Buongiorno, Mr. Andretti." Mrs. Moretti greeted him with familiarity, and something that looked like respect mixed with caution. "The usual?" "Per favore," he replied, his Italian carrying an accent that spoke of native fluency. And add a dozen of the anise cookies. My daughter mentioned wanting them. How is Gabriella? Still dancing? Every chance she gets. Her recital is next month. Something softened in the man's expression when he mentioned his daughter. She insists I sit in the front row. As you should. Mrs. Moretti began boxing the order. She's a sweet girl. You're lucky. I know. Elena watched this exchange with the detached focus of someone memorizing details for survival. Mr. Andretti. She knew that name. Everyone in Chicago who lived in certain neighborhoods knew the Andretti family, even if they tried to avoid knowing. Dominic Andretti. The man who controlled half the city's business, legitimate and otherwise. The man whose name Carlos had mentioned once, late at night after too much whiskey, with fear and reverence in equal measure. And now, Elena was standing 3 people behind him in a bakery line, preparing to humiliate herself in front of one of the most powerful men in Chicago. The businessman ahead of her ordered a coffee and a croissant, paid, and left. The young woman bought a baguette and some pastries, paid, and left. Elena stood at the counter. Mrs. Moretti's expression shifted from professional pleasantness to genuine warmth. Elena, mija, I haven't seen you in so long. How are you? How are those beautiful babies? The kindness in the old woman's voice almost broke her. Elena gripped the edge of the counter, forcing words through a throat tight with shame. They're good, Mrs. Moretti. Growing so fast. The automatic lie. The one mothers tell. I wanted to ask you something. Behind her, she could feel Dominic Andretti's presence. He'd stepped aside to wait for his order, standing near enough that he'd hear every word. Other customers had filtered into line behind her, an audience for her humiliation. Of course, mija. What do you need? Elena's voice dropped lower, but the bakery was small, quiet enough that sound carried. Do you have any stale bread? From yesterday or maybe the day before? Bread that you'd normally throw away? The warmth in Mrs. Moretti's face transformed into concern. Stale bread? Elena, what's... Please. Elena's hands twisted together, knuckles white. I know bakeries throw out bread after a certain time. I thought maybe, if you had any, I could take it off your hands. For my twins. Sophia and Miguel, they need to eat. And money's just really tight right now, and I thought... Her voice cracked. I have a little money. I can pay something. Not full price, but something. Please. The silence in the bakery was deafening. Elena felt every eye on her, felt the weight of judgment and pity from strangers who probably thought she was a drug addict or a deadbeat. Not a woman who'd worked 2 jobs until exhaustion made her collapse. Not a mother doing everything humanly possible to keep her children fed. Just someone begging for garbage. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Mrs. Moretti's eyes had gone soft with sympathy that made Elena want to cry. Oh, mija. Elena, you don't need to. I do. Elena pulled out her wallet with shaking hands. I need to pay. I'm not asking for charity. I just thought, bread that's too old to sell, that you'd throw away anyway. Maybe I could buy it for less, and then the twins could have sandwiches, or toast, or something besides. She stopped, unable to continue. Behind her, someone shifted. She felt rather than saw Dominic Andretti turn slightly, his attention fully on her now, listening to every humiliating word. How old are your twins? Mrs. Moretti asked gently. 5. They just turned 5 last month. Elena's throat was so tight the words barely came out. They're good kids. They don't complain, even when there's not much food. But they're so small, Mrs. Moretti, and they're hungry, and I just need... She couldn't finish. The old woman disappeared into the back room without another word. Elena stood at the counter, face burning, unable to look at anyone around her. She could hear whispers, pity, judgment, the low murmur of strangers discussing her desperation like it was entertainment. She shouldn't have come. Should have figured out something else. Anything else that didn't involve begging in public. Mrs. Moretti returned carrying 2 large bags, proper shopping bags, not small. She set them on the counter with deliberate care. "I have sourdough from yesterday," she said, her voice carrying a defiance directed at the watching customers, not at Elena. "And some rolls that didn't sell. These pastries are from this morning, but they're irregular shapes. Can't sell them for full price anyway." Elena stared at the bags. They were full, substantial, more food than she'd been able to buy in weeks. "Mrs. Moretti, this is too much. I can't—" "You said you have money?" The old woman's tone was firm. "How much?" $11. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "I have $11. Then pay me $11. "But this is worth $11 for bread I was going to throw away anyway." Mrs. Moretti's expression brooked no argument. "Take it, Elena. Feed those babies." Elena fumbled with her wallet, pulling out the bills and coins with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. She placed the money on the counter, her last $11, and reached for the bags. They were heavy. Real weight. Real food. Enough for days if she was careful. Maybe a week. "Thank you," she whispered, tears burning in her eyes. "Thank you so much." She turned to leave, clutching the bags against her chest, head down to avoid meeting anyone's gaze. She made it 3 steps toward the door before a voice stopped her. Wait. Deep. Accented with Italian smoothed by years in America. Unmistakably the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Dominic Andretti stood near the counter, his order forgotten, his dark eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that made her breath catch. "How old did you say your twins are?" he asked. Elena's instinct screamed at her to run, to get out of this bakery and away from this dangerous man's attention. But something in his expression wasn't judgment or contempt. It was something else entirely. 5, she managed. "They're 5? He studied her face for a long moment. Elena forced herself to meet his gaze, even as every survival instinct told her to look away, to make herself small and invisible. 5 is very young, Dominic said quietly. Too young to understand why they're hungry. The observation was so accurate, so painfully precise, that Elena felt something crack inside her chest. Sophia asking why they couldn't have cereal like before. Miguel crying because his stomach hurt, and not understanding that the hurt was just emptiness. "They're in your car," Dominic continued. It wasn't a question. "Across the street. I saw them when I came in, waiting for their mother." Terror spiked through Elena. This man had noticed her children, had looked at them, registered them, remembered them. That felt dangerous in ways she couldn't articulate. "I need to go," she said, gripping the bread bags tighter. "Thank you again, Mrs. Moretti." She fled before anyone could stop her, pushing through the door into the February cold. Her breath came in gasps that had nothing to do with the temperature. She crossed the street without looking, barely registering the honking horn of a taxi she'd stepped in front of. Sophia's face appeared in the car window, lighting up when she saw her mother. Miguel pressed against the glass beside his sister, both of them smiling with the pure, uncomplicated trust of children who believed their mother could fix anything. Elena yanked open the back door, shoving the bags onto the seat beside them. "Mama!" Sophia bounced in her booster seat. "Did you get bread?" "I got bread, baby. Lots of bread." Elena's voice shook. "And pastries. Real pastries." "Can we eat now?" Miguel's dark eyes were huge in his small face. "I'm really hungry, Mama." "Yes, baby. Right now." She pulled out a chocolate croissant, breaking it in half to share between them. They ate with the desperate speed of children who'd learned not to take food for granted, chocolate smearing their faces, crumbs falling onto their coats. Elena watched them eat, her heart breaking and mending simultaneously. This was it. This was what mattered. Two small humans who needed her, trusted her, deserved so much better than what she could provide. Through the bakery window across the street, she could see Dominic Andretti standing at the glass, watching her car, watching her children eat the bread she'd begged for. Their eyes met across the distance. His expression was unreadable, but he didn't look away. Neither did she. Something had happened in that bakery. Some shift, some change that Elena didn't understand yet. A man who controlled half of Chicago had witnessed her at her absolute lowest point, had heard her beg for stale bread to feed her 5-year-old twins, and instead of looking away with disgust or indifference, he'd watched. He'd asked questions. He'd noticed. Elena didn't know what that meant. Didn't know if it was dangerous or helpful or something in between. But as she started her car and pulled away from the curb, she felt the weight of Dominic Andretti's gaze following her like a physical presence. The collision had happened. She just didn't know yet what it would cost her. Elena made it exactly 4 blocks before her car started making the sound. A grinding, metallic whine that came from somewhere deep in the engine, the kind of noise that meant expensive repairs she couldn't afford. She pulled into a grocery store parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. The engine shuddered twice and died. "Mama?" Sophia's voice from the back seat, small and worried. "Why did we stop?" "Just a little car trouble, baby." Elena tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. "It's okay. We'll figure it out." Miguel had chocolate on his face and trust in his eyes. "Can you fix it?" "I'm going to try." The lie tasted bitter. Elena pulled out her phone. Dead battery. Of course, she hadn't been able to pay the electric bill, which meant she couldn't charge her phone at home. The library let her charge it sometimes, but she hadn't been there in 2 days. She looked at the bread bags on the seat beside her children. At least they had food now. That was something. That was more than she'd had an hour ago. A black SUV pulled into the parking spot beside her, then another on the opposite side. Elena's heart jumped into her throat. 2 vehicles, boxing her in, was exactly how the men who'd come about Carlos's debts had cornered her last time. The driver's door of the first SUV opened. A man stepped out, mid-30s, wearing a dark suit under a wool coat. He approached her window and tapped gently. Every instinct screamed danger. But the twins were in the car. Running wasn't an option. Elena cracked the window half an inch. "What do you want?" "Miss Rodriguez." The man's voice was professional, not threatening. "My name is Marco Santoro. I work for Mr. Andretti. He asked me to follow you from the bakery. Make sure you got home safely." Terror and confusion warred in Elena's chest. "Why would he do that?" "Because your car is 20 years old and you're driving in February with children." Marco's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Andretti noticed your vehicle when he arrived at the bakery. He was concerned it might not be reliable." "I don't need his concern." Elena's voice shook. "Please leave us alone." "Your engine just failed." Marco glanced at the hood. "You're stranded in a parking lot with 2 small children. No phone. I can see it's dead from here. And from the look of your coat, not enough warm clothing if you have to wait for help." He paused. "Mr. Andretti instructed me to offer assistance. Nothing more." "I don't want anything from him." "Mama," Miguel's voice interrupted. "I'm cold." The temperature in the car was already dropping. Without the engine running, the heat had died within minutes. Elena could see her breath now. Marco pulled out his phone. "I can call a tow truck. Have your car taken to a mechanic Mr. Andretti uses. Honest man. Fair prices. Or I can give you a ride home and arrange for the car to be dealt with later. Your choice, Miss Rodriguez, but those children are getting colder every minute you spend arguing with me. Elena looked at Sophia and Miguel, at their small faces starting to show the pinched look of cold setting in. Looked at the dead phone in her hand, the empty gas gauge, the $11 she no longer had. She had no money for a tow truck, no money for a mechanic, no way to get home except walking 3 miles in February with 2 5-year-olds. Just a ride home, she said finally. That's all. Of course. Marco stepped back, opening his phone. Tomas will drive you. I'll follow in the other vehicle. Your car will be towed to Benedetto's Auto on 5th Street. Here's the card. He slipped a business card through the window crack. They'll call you tomorrow with an assessment. I can't afford. We'll discuss payment options when the assessment is complete. Marco's tone remained professionally detached. Right now, let's get those kids somewhere warm. 20 minutes later, Elena stood in the doorway of her apartment with Sophia and Miguel, watching the black SUV drive away. The bread bag sat on her kitchen counter. Her car was gone, presumably being towed to some mechanic who worked for Dominic Andretti, and she had no idea what any of it meant. The apartment was freezing, the heat having been shut off 3 days ago when she couldn't pay the gas bill. Elena pulled out every blanket they owned, building a nest on the couch where the twins could stay warm together. Mama, can we have more bread? Sophia asked, already burrowing under the blankets beside her brother. After it warms up a little, baby. Let it get to room temperature first. Elena was making it up, stretching the food as long as possible. Why don't you and Miguel draw some pictures while we wait? She gave them the crayons and paper she kept for exactly this purpose, free entertainment that required no electricity or heat. While they drew, Elena stood at the kitchen window, looking down at the street 4 stories below. A black sedan was parked across the street. Different from the SUVs, but she recognized the type now. Someone watching. Someone making sure she stayed put, or stayed safe, or stayed something. Her phone buzzed. She'd plugged it into the wall, forgetting the electricity was off, but apparently there was just enough residual charge for one message to come through. Unknown number. The mechanic will call tomorrow. Repair costs will be discussed then. Make sure your children stay warm tonight. Dia de Dominic Andretti. Elena stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply button. What was she supposed to say? Thank you for stalking me? Thank you for witnessing the most humiliating moment of my life? Thank you for whatever this is? She deleted the message without responding. That night, she made sandwiches from the bread Mrs. Moretti had given her. The twins ate like they were starving, which they had been. Elena ate half a roll and saved the rest for tomorrow, her stomach so knotted with anxiety that food felt impossible anyway. They slept together in the blanket nest on the couch, the twins between Elena's arms, their small bodies warm against hers. Outside, the black sedan remained parked across the street. Elena lay awake until dawn, listening to Sophia and Miguel breathe, trying to understand what had happened and what it meant for their survival. The mechanic called at 9 the next morning. Miss Rodriguez, this is Tony Benedetto. I've got your Honda here. Ran the diagnostics like Mr. Andretti requested. Elena's stomach dropped. How bad is it? Transmission's shot. Engine's got issues too. Honestly, Miss Rodriguez, this car isn't worth fixing. Repair costs would be more than the vehicle's value. Tony's voice was kind but firm. You'd be throwing money into a hole. I don't have money to throw anywhere. Elena's voice came out flat. I need that car. I have to get to work, get my kids to school. Mr. Andretti mentioned you might have transportation concerns. He asked me to present you with some options. I don't want his options. Just hear me out, okay? Tony sounded patient, like he dealt with stubborn people regularly. Option 1. I can patch the transmission temporarily. Won't last more than a few months, but it'll get you mobile. Cost about $800 in parts and labor. $800 might as well have been $8 million. Option 2, Tony continued. Mr. Andretti has a vehicle he's willing to sell you. 2018 Honda CR-V, good condition, reliable. He'll take your current car as trade-in and work out a payment plan for the difference. Why would he do that? Elena's hand tightened on the phone. He doesn't know me. I'm no one to him. I don't ask questions above my pay grade, Miss Rodriguez. I just fix cars. Tony paused. But between you and me, Mr. Andretti doesn't usually make offers like this. Whatever happened, you made an impression. An impression. Elena had begged for stale bread in front of him. That was the impression. Desperation and humiliation, witnessed by a man who controlled half of Chicago. I need to think about it, she said. Sure, but your kids need transportation and winter's not getting warmer. Think fast. Tony gave her his number and hung up. Elena stood in her freezing apartment, staring at the bread on her counter, at the business card Marco had given her, at the message from Dominic Andretti she'd deleted, but could still remember word for word. A knock on her door made her jump. She looked through the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway, early 40s, wearing an expensive coat and carrying a leather portfolio. Professional, polished, not threatening. Elena opened the door with the chain still attached. Yes? Miss Rodriguez, my name is Angela Russo. I'm an attorney. The woman held up a business card. Mr. Andretti asked me to speak with you about your current legal and financial situation. I don't need an attorney. Your husband died 6 months ago, correct? Carlos Rodriguez? Angela's expression was sympathetic but businesslike. And since his death, you've been contacted by debt collectors. Some of them legitimate, some of them not. Elena's breath caught. How do you know that? Because Mr. Andretti made inquiries. He's concerned that you're being taken advantage of by people claiming your husband owed them money. Angela's voice gentled. May I come in? Just for a few minutes. I promise I'm here to help, not to cause problems. Against her better judgment, Elena unhooked the chain. Angela stepped inside, taking in the freezing apartment, the blanket nest on the couch, the twins playing quietly with crayons in the corner. Her expression flickered with something that looked like anger on Elena's behalf. How long has your heat been off? She asked quietly. 3 days. I couldn't pay the bill. And your electricity? 2 days. Angela pulled out her phone, typing rapidly. That's being handled. Gas and electric will be restored by this afternoon. I can't pay you back. You're not paying anything back. Angela's tone was firm. Mr. Andretti is handling certain expenses while we sort out your legal situation. Consider it an advance against future employment. I don't work for him. Not yet, but he's prepared to offer you a position if you're interested. Angela opened her portfolio, pulling out documents. First, let's talk about your husband's debts. I've reviewed the claims made against his estate. Approximately $60,000 from various creditors, most of them legitimate businesses he bought from on credit. However, there are 3 claims that concern me. She laid out papers on Elena's small kitchen table. These 3 men, Rafael Santos, Marco Colombo, and a man who goes by just Eddie, have been demanding payment for alleged debts totaling $200,000. They've threatened you, correct? Elena's throat went dry. How do you know about them? Because Mr. Andretti's people have been monitoring the situation. These men don't have legitimate claims, Miss Rodriguez. They're trying to extort you based on the assumption that your husband stole something valuable from them, something they want back. Carlos didn't steal anything. He was an import broker. He moved shipping containers, handled customs paperwork. He was also laundering money for a criminal organization. Angela's voice was gentle but direct. I'm sorry. I know this is difficult to hear. But your husband was involved in moving illegal funds through his import business. Approximately $3 million went missing from an operation he handled 6 months before his death. These men believe he hid it, and they believe you know where. The room spun. Elena gripped the table edge. I don't know anything about that. Carlos never talked about his business. I thought he was just handling shipping. I believe you. Angela's expression was sincere. But these men don't. And they're going to keep pressuring you until either you give them what they want, or someone with more power tells them to back off. Someone like Dominic Andretti. Exactly like Dominic Andretti. Angela met her eyes. These men work in organizations that ultimately answer to Mr. Andretti. He can make them leave you alone with one phone call. But he needs something from you in return. What? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. What does he want? Information about your husband's business, client names, shipping routes, anything you remember him mentioning, financial records if you have them. Mr. Andretti believes the missing money is connected to a larger operation he's been investigating. Help him find it, and he'll protect you from the people looking for it. I don't have any information. I didn't even know Carlos was doing anything illegal. Then we'll figure out what you do know, piece by piece. Angela pulled out more papers. In the meantime, Mr. Andretti is offering you employment at one of his restaurants. Legitimate work, legal income, enough to support your family. You'd start as a hostess, with the possibility of management training if you show aptitude. Elena looked at Sophia and Miguel, still drawing pictures, oblivious to the conversation that was reshaping their mother's life. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. What if I say no? She asked quietly. What if I refuse all of this? The help, the job, the protection. Angela's expression turned grave. Then within a week, maybe 2, those men will stop asking nicely. They'll decide you're hiding something and use methods that don't involve polite conversations. And Mr. Andretti, who currently has a reason to keep you safe, will have no reason to intervene. So I don't actually have a choice. You have the choice between accepting help from someone powerful enough to protect you or facing dangerous men alone. Angela's voice softened. I know this isn't fair. I know you didn't ask for any of this, but your husband's choices put you in this position, and now you have to make the best decision you can with the options available. Elena thought about the bread on her counter, bought with her last $11. Thought about begging in that bakery while Dominic Andretti watched. Thought about Sophia and Miguel, who deserved safety and stability, and a mother who could provide for them. The job, she said finally. Tell me about the job. Angela smiled, relieved. Sapori d'Italia, Mr. Andretti's restaurant in River North. Fine dining, high-end clientele. You'd work evening shifts, 5 days a week, $30 an hour to start. Plus tips that are typically very generous. Mr. Andretti will arrange childcare for the twins during your shifts. $30 an hour. Elena currently made 12 at the diner, before tips that barely added up to anything. When would I start? Tomorrow night if you're willing. There's training involved, but you'd be paid for that too. Angela pulled out an employment contract. Everything is here in writing. Legal, legitimate. Nothing that would put you at risk. Elena read through the contract carefully. It was exactly as Angela described. Standard employment terms, reasonable expectations, a salary that would transform her life if it was real. I need to arrange childcare, she said slowly. I don't have anyone to watch the twins. Mr. Andretti has already arranged for a nanny service. Bonded, background checked, professional. Someone will come to your apartment 2 hours before your shift. Stay with the children until you return. Paid for by Mr. Andretti as part of your employment benefits. It was too much. Too convenient. Too perfectly designed to eliminate every objection she might have. Why is he doing this? Elena asked. The truth, please, not because he's generous or because he wants to help. Why does Dominic Andretti care about me and my children? Angela was quiet for a moment. Because he has a 6-year-old daughter named Gabriella. And when he saw you begging for stale bread to feed your 5-year-old twins, he saw what could happen to his own child if he died and left her unprotected. That's the truth, Miss Rodriguez. He has empathy for your situation because he understands what you're trying to protect. The honesty of it hit harder than any manipulation would have. Elena signed the contract. That afternoon, the gas and electricity came back on. Heat flooded the apartment for the first time in days. The twins ran around touching radiators, marveling at the warmth. At 4 o'clock, a woman named Rosa arrived with credentials from a professional nanny service. She was warm, grandmotherly, immediately enchanting Sophia and Miguel with stories and games. At 6, a delivery arrived. Groceries. Real groceries, not just bread. Milk, eggs, fresh vegetables, chicken, pasta. Everything Elena hadn't been able to afford for months. The card attached said simply, "For the twins." Dear Elena stood in her newly warm kitchen, surrounded by food she hadn't paid for, wearing the knowledge that tomorrow she'd start a job that would change everything, and felt the walls of her careful independence crumbling around her. She'd wanted to handle this alone, to be strong, self-sufficient, the kind of mother who didn't need rescue. Instead, she'd begged for stale bread in a bakery and caught the attention of a man powerful enough to reshape her entire world with a phone call. Tomorrow, she would walk into Dominic Andretti's restaurant and begin a new life. Whether that life was salvation or a different kind of trap, she'd find out soon enough. Outside, the black sedan remained parked across the street, keeping watch through the February darkness. Protection, Angela had called it. Elena wasn't sure yet if she believed that. But as she watched Sophia and Miguel eat real dinner at a warm table, laughing with Rosa about something silly, she knew one thing with certainty. Whatever price Dominic Andretti eventually asked her to pay, she would find a way to pay it. Because her children were warm and fed and safe tonight. And that was worth almost anything. Sapori d'Italia occupied a corner building in River North, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of place where reservations had to be made weeks in advance, and the wine list required a sommelier to navigate. Elena stood outside at 6:30 on a Thursday evening, staring at the frosted glass doors, trying to convince herself to walk inside. Rosa had arrived at her apartment 2 hours ago, immediately winning the twins over with a baking project that had left flour on every surface and smiles on both small faces. Elena had kissed Sophia and Miguel goodbye, promising to be back before they went to sleep, trying to ignore the guilt that came with leaving them, even though Rosa seemed perfectly competent and kind. The February wind cut through her coat, the same worn coat she'd had for 3 years. She'd considered buying something nicer with the advance Angela had given her, then decided feeding her children mattered more than looking professional. The twins needed new shoes. Miguel's had holes in both soles. A man in a dark suit opened the restaurant door from inside. "Miss Rodriguez? I'm Thomas, the general manager. Please, come in out of the cold." The interior was even more intimidating than the exterior. White tablecloths, crystal stemware, art on the walls that looked original and expensive. The kind of place Carlos had taken her once, early in their relationship, trying to impress her with money she hadn't known was dirty. "Mr. Andretti is waiting in his office," Thomas said, leading her through the dining room toward the back. "He wants to speak with you before your training begins." Elena's pulse jumped. "I thought I was just starting work tonight." "You are, but Mr. Andretti likes to meet personally with new employees." Thomas's tone suggested this was routine, nothing to worry about. They climbed stairs to a second floor Elena hadn't known existed. A hallway led to a door marked "Private." Thomas knocked twice and opened it without waiting for response. The office beyond was nothing like Elena had expected. No ostentatious displays of wealth, no expensive art or a massive desk meant to intimidate. Just a functional space with tall windows overlooking the street, built-in bookshelves filled with what looked like actual books that had been read, and a wooden desk covered in paperwork and a laptop. Dominic Andretti stood at one of the windows, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian. He wore dark slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking less like the dangerous man from the bakery and more like any businessman working late. He glanced up when Elena entered, his dark eyes registering her presence. He said something final into the phone and ended the call. "Miss Rodriguez, thank you for coming." He gestured to one of the chairs facing his desk. "Please, sit." Elena sat, her hands twisting together in her lap. Up close, in better light than the bakery had offered, she could see him more clearly. The scar along his jawline, faded but still visible. The gray threading through his dark hair. Laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his reputation would imply. He was younger than she'd initially thought. Early 40s, maybe. Closer to her own age than she'd realized. "How are your children?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her, rather than behind his desk. The choice felt deliberate, removing the barrier of authority. "They're good. Warm. Fed." Elena met his gaze. "Thank you for the groceries. And for having the utilities restored." "You're welcome." His expression was unreadable. "Angela spoke with you about employment terms?" "Yes. I signed the contract." "Good. But before we discuss your role here, I need you to understand something about the situation you're in." Dominic leaned forward slightly. "Your husband's death was not an accident, Miss Rodriguez. I assume Angela told you that?" Elena's throat tightened. "She said he was laundering money. That $3 million went missing." "Correct. Carlos was moving funds for an organization with connections throughout the Midwest. The money disappeared from a shipment he was handling. 6 weeks later, he died in what was staged to look like a single-vehicle accident." Dominic's voice remained calm, clinical. "The people he worked for believe he stole the money and hid it before they could recover it. I don't know anything about missing money. Carlos never told me about any of this. I believe you, but believing you doesn't solve the problem." Dominic pulled a folder from his desk, opening it to reveal photographs. "These 3 men have been watching you for months: Rafael Santos, Marco Colombo, and Edward Chen. They work for different branches of the same organization, all trying to find what your husband took." Elena stared at the photographs. She recognized 2 of them. The men who'd come to her apartment demanding money, who'd followed her to the grocery store, who'd made her feel hunted every moment she left her home. "What do they want from me?" "Information. Leverage. Eventually, if they don't get cooperation, they'll escalate to threats against your children." Dominic's jaw tightened. "That's not speculation. That's how these operations work. They'll use Sophia and Miguel to force you to give them something you don't have." Terror flooded Elena's system. "You said you could protect us." "Angela said you could make them back off." "I can. I am." Dominic closed the folder. "As of this morning, I made it clear to the leadership above these 3 men that you and your children are under my protection. That any action against you is an action against me. They've been ordered to stand down." Relief hit so hard Elena's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "Why would you do that? You don't owe me anything." "No, I don't." Dominic stood, walking back to the window. "But I heard you begging for stale bread to feed your 5-year-old twins. I heard the desperation in your voice, the shame. And I know what it's like to be afraid for your child's safety, to feel like no matter what you do, it's not enough to protect them." He turned to face her. "My daughter is 6. Her mother, my ex-wife, lives in California with full custody because I agreed that distance from my world was safer for Gabriella. I see my daughter 4 times a year, always under supervision, always with the knowledge that my business puts her at risk every day she carries my name. The vulnerability in that admission made Elena see him differently. Not just the dangerous man who controlled half of Chicago, but a father who'd sacrificed proximity to his child for her safety. I don't want your life, she said quietly. I don't want to be involved in whatever world you operate in. You already are involved, whether you want to be or not. Your husband made that choice for you. Dominic's expression hardened slightly. But I'm offering you a way to navigate it safely. You work here legitimately. You earn legitimate money. My protection extends to you and your children as long as you honor your employment contract and don't create problems. What kind of problems? Going to the police about things you might overhear. Speaking to people about my business. Betraying my trust in any way. His voice dropped lower, carrying weight. I'm helping you, Miss Rodriguez, but that help comes with expectations of loyalty and discretion. Elena understood what he wasn't saying directly. This job came with strings. Protection came with obligation. Nothing was free, even when it was presented as generosity. I need this job, she said carefully. I need the money, the stability, the safety, but I need to know exactly what you expect from me beyond hostess duties. Something that might have been approval flickered in Dominic's eyes. I expect you to be observant. You'll see people come through this restaurant. Business associates, politicians, people making deals. I expect you to remember faces. Notice who meets with whom. Report anything that seems unusual. You want me to spy for you. I want you to be aware of your surroundings and share relevant information. The same awareness that made you notice your husband was hiding things. Dominic pulled out a business card, identical to the one he'd given her through the message. This is my private number. You call me directly if you see Rafael Santos, Marco Colombo, or Edward Chen anywhere near this restaurant or near your home. You call me if anyone asks questions about your husband or about me. You call me if anything feels wrong. Elena took the card, adding it to the one already in her wallet. And if I don't want to be your informant? Then you're just a hostess, and you still have my protection because I gave my word. But you'll have missed an opportunity to be genuinely useful, which means missed opportunities for advancement and higher pay. He paused. I don't force anyone to work for me beyond their contracted duties, Miss Rodriguez, but I reward people who prove themselves valuable. It was manipulation wrapped in choice. Elena recognized it even as she understood she'd probably accept it. $30 an hour was life-changing. Whatever came with it, she'd find ways to manage. I'll be observant, she said finally. I'll report anything unusual, but I won't do anything illegal, and I won't put my children at risk. I would never ask you to. Dominic's tone softened. Your training starts tonight. Thomas will show you the systems, introduce you to the staff. You'll shadow the current hostess for a week before taking shifts alone. Any questions? Just one. Elena stood, meeting his gaze. That morning at the bakery. Why did you really follow me? It wasn't just concern about my car. Dominic was quiet for a moment. I heard you begging for stale bread with the kind of desperation that comes from loving your children more than your pride. That's rare, Miss Rodriguez. Most people prioritize their dignity over their children's needs. You didn't hesitate. That told me something about your character. It told you I was desperate. It told me you were a mother who would do anything to protect her children. That's the kind of person worth protecting. He moved toward the door. Welcome to Sapori d'Italia. I hope you'll find the work rewarding. The training was intense but manageable. Elena learned the reservation system, the table layouts, the protocols for greeting VIP guests. The current hostess, a polished woman named Claudia, showed her how to read the room, anticipate problems, handle difficult customers with grace. The staff treated her with careful politeness, the kind that suggested they knew she'd been personally hired by Mr. Andretti and weren't sure what that meant. She caught whispers in the kitchen, speculation about who she was and why the boss had taken an interest. By the end of her first week, Elena could navigate the restaurant blindfolded. She knew which tables had the best views, which servers handled high-maintenance clients best, which regulars tipped well and which didn't. The work was demanding but not impossible, and the money was exactly as promised. $30 an hour, 5 shifts a week, plus tips that added another $200 weekly. Elena's first paycheck was more money than she'd seen in 6 months combined. She paid 3 months of back rent immediately, bought Sophia and Miguel new shoes, new coats, knew everything they'd needed for months, put money aside for the car Dominic was selling her, the 2018 Honda that Tony had assured her was in perfect condition. Life started resembling normal. The twins thrived with Rosa, who came every evening and treated them like her own grandchildren. The apartment stayed warm. The refrigerator stayed full. Elena slept without the constant terror of eviction or starvation. But she also noticed things. The men who came to Sapori d'Italia weren't all legitimate businessmen. She recognized the type now, the same dangerous awareness Carlos's associates had carried. They met in the private dining room, conversations conducted in low voices that didn't carry beyond their tables. Dominic himself came to the restaurant 3 or 4 times a week, always meeting with different people. Sometimes politicians she recognized from news broadcasts. Sometimes men in expensive suits who carried themselves like violence was always an option. Sometimes both at the same table, discussing things Elena couldn't hear but could extrapolate from body language and tone. She remembered faces, made mental notes, reported nothing because nothing seemed unusual enough to warrant a call to Dominic's private line. Until the 3rd week, when Rafael Santos walked through the door. Elena was seating a couple at table 7 when she saw him, tall, heavily built, with a tattoo visible on his neck above his collar. The same man from the photographs Dominic had shown her. One of the 3 who'd been hunting her for information about Carlos. Her hands went cold. She finished seating the couple with mechanical efficiency, then moved behind the hostess stand, pulling out her phone with shaking fingers. She dialed Dominic's number. He answered on the 2nd ring. Elena? Rafael Santos just walked into the restaurant. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He's alone, requesting a table. Silence on the other end, then. Seat him in the main dining room, visible location, act natural. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The call ended. Elena looked up to find Rafael approaching the hostess stand, a smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. Table for 1, he said. His accent was thick, his gaze assessing her face with uncomfortable intensity. I heard this place has excellent food. Of course. Elena's training kicked in, professional autopilot. Right this way. She led him to table 12, center of the dining room, exactly where Dominic had instructed. Raphael sat, accepting a menu, his eyes never leaving her face. You look familiar, he said. Have we met before? I don't think so. Elena kept her expression neutral. Can I start you with something to drink? Water is fine. He leaned back in his chair. You sure we haven't met? You look like someone I've been trying to find. Her pulse hammered. I'm new here. Perhaps you're thinking of someone else. Maybe. But his tone suggested he knew exactly who she was. Elena escaped to the hostess stand, her hands trembling. Through the window, she saw a black SUV pull up outside. Dominic emerged, moving with purposeful speed, his expression carved from stone. He entered the restaurant, his eyes immediately finding Raphael at table 12. Something passed between them. Recognition, challenge, a silent conversation Elena couldn't interpret. Dominic walked directly to Raphael's table and sat down without invitation. The conversation that followed was too quiet for Elena to hear from her position, but she watched body language. Raphael's initial confidence faltering, Dominic's controlled intensity never wavering. A discussion that lasted maybe 3 minutes before Raphael stood, throwing cash on the table, and left without ordering. Dominic remained seated for another moment, then rose and crossed to where Elena stood. "You did well," he said quietly. "Calling immediately was exactly right." "What did you say to him?" "That you're under my protection, and any further contact will be considered a direct violation of the agreement his organization has with mine." Dominic's jaw was tight. "He won't bother you again." "How can you be sure?" "Because I made it clear what happens if he does." The ice in Dominic's voice suggested consequences Raphael had understood perfectly. Elena should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the weight of obligation settling heavier on her shoulders. Dominic had protected her again, which meant she owed him again, which meant the strings attached to this job were pulling tighter. "Thank you," she managed. "You're welcome." Dominic glanced around the restaurant, at the other diners who'd noticed nothing unusual. "Go home after your shift. Take tomorrow off. Spend time with your children. I'll have security outside your building tonight, just as a precaution." He left before she could respond, disappearing into the February night as quickly as he'd arrived. That night, Elena returned home to find Sophia and Miguel asleep in their beds, Rosa reading quietly on the couch. The older woman assured her the twins had eaten well, done their homework, brushed their teeth without complaint. After Rosa left, Elena stood in the twins' bedroom doorway, watching them sleep. Sophia with her arm flung over her head, Miguel curled on his side with his favorite stuffed bear. Safe, warm, fed, protected. Everything Elena had wanted for them, purchased with employment that came with expectations she was only beginning to understand. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Thank you for your awareness tonight. You prevented a problem before it could escalate. Your next paycheck will reflect my appreciation." Dia Elena stared at the message. Awareness. Such a careful word for what she'd done. Informing on a man who'd come to the restaurant, enabling whatever Dominic had threatened him with. She was becoming complicit in a world she'd sworn to avoid. One step at a time, one choice at a time, trading her independence for security. But as she looked at her sleeping children, Elena knew she'd make the same choices again. Their safety mattered more than her moral discomfort. Their full stomachs mattered more than her pride. Dominic Andretti had heard her begging for stale bread and decided she was worth saving. Now she was learning what being saved actually cost. The black sedan was parked outside her building when she looked out the window, watching, protecting, ensuring that Rafael Santos and anyone like him understood that Elena Rodriguez belonged to Dominic Andretti's world now. Whether she'd intended to or not, whether she wanted to or not. The reckoning would come eventually, the moment when protection and obligation transformed into something else entirely. But tonight, Elena was too tired to worry about future costs. Tonight, her children were safe. That was enough. Outside, snow began to fall, covering Chicago in white silence. Inside, Elena stood at the window and wondered what price she'd eventually be asked to pay for the warmth and safety Dominic Andretti had given her desperate family. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.